We need to complete a thorough, rigorous investigation as quickly as possible, and we're working very hard to deliver that.
A growing crisis. A task force now investigating more than 100 sites suspected of being contaminated with asbestos.
The investigation is progressing as quickly as possible. We have significant additional resourcing from colleagues across government.
Contaminated mulch found at sites including railway stations, a hospital, a primary school, and 17 locations in the one park at the Rozelle interchange.
I think it's appalling. Absolutely appalling.
I think it's totally overblown by the press and the media.
Oh, I feel terrible about it.
The common link? Contaminated mulch sold by Green Life Resource Recovery. Green Life maintaining its mulch tested negative, pointing the finger elsewhere.
Once my client deposits that mulch at that site, it then has no further control over what happens to that material. I think certainly my client's at risk of being a scapegoat here for what is a complex supply chain.
All asbestos products should be removed from green waste, so it's either something that's not happened properly or just missed.
The Asbestos Task Force today conducting precautionary testing at 7 schools across Sydney. St Luke's shutting its doors.
We worked through the night to communicate with those schools and ensure they could take appropriate steps to manage any risk.
So far, almost all the asbestos is bonded, a low-risk type of asbestos.
In the bonded asbestos, the fibres won't be released very easily. Even if you have had an exposure, it doesn't necessarily mean that disease will follow.
But not everyone is taking this reassurance to heart.
I think the government could probably share a little bit more about what they've actually found and the risk it actually poses.
I don't think the EPA has this under control because every day it's just another place and another number and another school.
With the EPA aiming to finish its investigation as quickly as it can, Sydney-siders will be hoping their city receives a clean bill of health.
When we conclude our investigation, I'm confident we'll be able to give government relevant advice to ensure that community confidence can be present.
With us is the Chief Executive of New South Wales EPA, Tony Chappel. Tony, many Sydney viewers will just want to know how on earth asbestos has ended up being spread across our parks. Can you answer that?
Well, it absolutely shouldn't be there. We have strict rules about contamination in mulch. It's not allowed. And a major focus of our investigation is understanding exactly how that came to be the case and dealing with the consequences.
So what are the consequences?
Well, asbestos generally occurs in 2 forms. This is what's called bonded asbestos, which is actually prolific in Australia. We've used it for the last century. It's a legacy of industrial development here. It's in about 1 in 3 homes. But when it's bonded to cement or other products of that nature, it does not present a significant risk. In fact, it's very low risk, and if it's not disturbed, the risk is really negligible. So it's really about identifying if there is contamination present in these sites and removing it where it is and just ensuring they're not disturbed while that process occurs.
Tony, can you guarantee that there's no risk to this low risk?
All I can do is reference the advice of my colleagues in New South Wales Health, expert advice, which is that bonded asbestos represents a low risk. It is not something that can be inhaled the way the terrible sort of lung diseases we've seen from some of the workers who worked in manufacturing, or the installation of the friable asbestos in people's roofs through companies like Mr. Fluffy, throughout the last 100 years. Those are very dangerous fibres. This is a different product which is bonded, and provided it's not disturbed, New South Wales Health can assure us that it does not present a serious risk.
But is there a chance that any of that friable asbestos is there?
Well, there was one detection that was deemed friable because it's a small piece of bonded asbestos, but small enough to potentially be inhaled or ingested.
As a parent that takes their kids to the park all the time, you talk about inhalation of this bonded asbestos. What happens if they're in contact with it, if they're putting it in their mouth, if they're bringing it into the house? What about that?
It's not something that any of us want our children interacting with, as we wouldn't any other harmful substance or chemical. And that's why we take this extremely seriously. We've today announced that we're undertaking precautionary testing. We haven't detected contamination, but we have a concern contaminated mulch may have been placed at 7 schools, but we're working with each of those schools to ensure those garden beds are not disturbed and that material is tested over the weekend, and where remediation is required, that happens quickly.
Tony, I'm a Sydney parent as well with a 3-year-old. Now, this started in January when a child came home with asbestos from a playground. How long could this have been a problem and we just didn't know about it?
It's a great point. Frankly, it's been a problem since the 1920s when we started manufacturing asbestos, because we do find bonded asbestos in a whole host of locations, and when it is identified, it needs to be removed safely and disposed of. And I think the biggest risk for any of us is actually any kind of home renovation, because so many of our homes contain asbestos which is safe unless it's disturbed. When people break through walls or do demolition and they haven't first had their home assessed, that's where the real risk is present.
Well, a statement from Green Life is on our website. Tony, thanks for your time tonight.
Thank you.
This is tricky territory, it really is, because they have to act quickly, but we don't want more of this to spread around, so we've got to find the source, and I think a lot of people want to know who to blame.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking as a parent again, I mean, these are kind of worrying times in Sydney. You're looking at these lists of schools come out and you're hunting to see if your school is on it. You're seeing these lists of playgrounds come out. You're hunting to see if you've been at that playground recently. I mean, one of the playgrounds was just opposite where my family was living a little while ago. But, you know, that creates the uncertainty as well. We don't know how long this has been a problem, and you can understand why people are so worried.
A friend of mine sent me a photo from on her front porch this morning, and it was of a parking glebe that was completely cordoned off. I said to her, I didn't know whether it was. I said it's probably asbestos testing. Then she came out maybe 12 hours later and all the median strips that have mulch and trees growing out of them have all been cordoned off. I did a Google search because the information as well, you have to search for whether the area that you see is being tested. And I said, you're living in an asbestos area. I go there all the time. I take my kids to the park. We walk along there. So it's not just one certain area across New South Wales as well. It seems to be everywhere.
Well, with the amount of mould that your kids eat, I'm sure they'll be okay.
They're okay. I better check in. I haven't heard from them.
Yeah, maybe you should actually.
The thing that jumped out to me is someone called Mr. Fluffy being referenced in such a serious story.